And now I am joined by the U.S. Ambassador to NATO and former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, Kurt Volker. Mr. Volker, greetings and thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Ambassador, let's start with the G7 Summit in Hiroshima. In your opinion, why is it historic? Of course, if you think it's historic.
Well, I think it's a nice optic. Remember, it used to be the G8 with Vladimir Putin involved. And now Russia is not there. It's back to the G7. And Ukraine is there. President Zelensky meeting with all of the G7. So I think that was a very nice symbol. In addition to that, they made a strong statement about continuing support for Ukraine. And it coincided with the Biden administration finally giving a green light to training for Ukrainian pilots and logistics crews for F-16s, meaning that F-16s will be transferred to Ukraine sometime in the next several months.
I realize that one day our country will become a NATO member, but I also understand that for the sake of Ukraine's security and ultimately for the sake of the West's security, this should be done as soon as possible. Because it is Ukraine's membership in NATO that will guarantee our collective security. And I also understand that we will not become a member of the North Atlantic Alliance while we are at war. But at the same time, can we at least be formally invited to join NATO at the July summit in Vilnius?
Right. Well, I completely agree with you. I think Ukraine will end this war with the most powerful and most experienced military in Europe. So I think that's already a very strong addition to the alliance. I don't believe that Vladimir Putin will ever give up on trying to regain lands that he believes should belong to Russia, including Baltic states or Poland or Ukraine. So it's another reason why it's important to have a clear dividing line, no more gray zones. Gray zones are green lights to Vladimir Putin, so we have to eliminate those. Now, what I think should happen at Vilnius, there should be a reiteration of NATO's commitment that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, and there should be steps taken to begin to operationalize that process. Remember, this commitment has been on the table for 15 years, and yet no one has done anything to this point. It's time that we actually start taking steps. Even if it means that Ukraine will not become a member while the war is still ongoing right now, we have to demonstrate that this is where things are headed to, and sooner rather than later.
But Ambassador, do I understand you correctly that there will be no formal invitation to join during the Vilnius summit?
Yeah, that is the current state of play. I've had several conversations in Europe over the past few weeks, and many of our European allies are now more sympathetic to Ukraine joining NATO than they have ever been. And indeed, the U.S. administration appears to be lagging behind a little bit. But all that being said, NATO operates by consensus. And I don't think allies are going to admit Ukraine right away because they don't want to be driven into fighting Russia directly themselves. They want to keep supporting Ukraine, but not initiate their own conflict with Russia. So I think it's going to be put off a bit. But I do hope that at least the commitment is strengthened and we start to see some practical steps to get it accomplished. And maybe it would actually be accomplished as soon as next year at the 75th anniversary summit in Washington, D.C.
Next year?
I hope so. There's the 75th anniversary summit of NATO, which will take place in Washington, D.C. next year. It'll be the midst of our presidential election as well. But if things go well in the war and we continue to build support for Ukraine's membership, perhaps that could be a time when we might see some progress.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends and analytics on Spotlight Ukraine. Like, share and subscribe.